obviously, number one, we're very excited. You know, they have the opportunity to play that 13th game and to be in the Sugar Bowl is exciting to all of us. We'll start practice today, and we'll go this weekend, next weekend, and then we'll keep going after next weekend and kind of dodge around finals times and all those kind of things that you deal with this time of year and with recruiting. But, you know, we're going to play a great opponent in Virginia Tech, a well-coached school team. Frank Beamer's done a tremendous job for many years, so it's going to be a great challenge and be a lot of fun. And, you know, we want to enjoy the atmosphere and embrace it, and but we want to prepare to go win, and that's why you play in bowl games, and you have that opportunity.
You had said on the conference call the other night you've done this a couple of different ways in bowl prep. What have you found works, and what are the things you're going to try to do?
Yeah, Mark, you know, the one thing, you know, there's a fine line between, in my opinion, trying to outsmart yourself, maybe out-practice yourself a little bit in the intensity that you want to do things with. There's a tendency sometimes to get stale within, and that can happen all year long, but you like the consistency of how you've prepared. But at the same time, I think you need to change it up enough, and we'll try and do that a little bit, you know, from pads to, you know, shoulder pads and helmets to full to length of practice to maybe some different drills and those kind of things.
How much do you use those 15 practices just to bowl prep versus actually maybe getting a jump ahead on next year?
If we had better depth at the big positions, you know, your O-line and D-line, I think we'd do more. But, you know, when we came in, we had only 8 scholarship offensive linemen, and that's what we have, and usually you're at 15. You know, that's a little dicey. You know, you've got to be healthy. You know, you can't run the race if you're not at the start line, and so that is always part of it. You know, we're a little deeper at some other positions, but O-line and D-line is where we're the thinnest at, and so you got to be smart in how you transition your practice and the physicalness that you want to play with, you got to practice with. So that's becomes more difficult, and it's kind of like spring ball is. You know, when you don't have a spring game, well, why don't you have a spring game? Well, you don't have enough bodies, and you know we're still in that position, obviously, where we don't have the bodies, especially at the big positions.
Speaking of having the bodies, there was a suggestion to the NCAA that the scholarships be reduced from 85 to 80. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yep.
Your thoughts on that?
I think it's ridiculous. You know, I think, you know, when you go through a season, and we've been fortunate this year, you know, when you look at some of the injuries and things that can happen, once you take your two deeps and then you look at your skill groups and all those things, I don't think it's a wise suggestion.
You talked on the conference call about needing to get better in a lot of areas before Virginia Tech. Was there one thing in the Ohio State game that you saw that kind of just stood out to you that said we really need to work on that before our bowl?
Yeah, you know, I think in the back end, I think we played a little looser than we had been, and that's alarming a little bit. I think their quarterback, I think, has either thrown for or has 28 touchdowns this year, and you know they're very good at what they do, and we've got to be tighter in coverage. We've got to be better in zone. You know, all those things are part of it.
Do you expect your coaching staff to be intact going into next season? I mean, there's so much going on.
I don't know. Did you hear anything? Yeah, I do. You know, I'm sure if there was anything, they would approach me about it.
Speaking of coaching staffs, any reaction? The NCAA has given Ohio State a waiver to have 2 coaching staffs, one with Meyer that can just recruit, one that can just coach, while you and other teams and bowls are trying to juggle recruiting and coaching. Any reaction to that? Seems like a disadvantage.
You know, I think it's a little different. I never heard of it before. You know, I may have gone that route. You know, it's different. That would be my reaction. I've never heard of it, but you know, there's probably a lot of things that I haven't heard of. There are a lot of things I haven't heard of. So yeah, it's different. Is it your last part of that, is that an advantage? Yeah, I think so.
Thoughts on Molk?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome, and you know, deserving. David did a tremendous job this year in a lot of ways, and I was excited for him.
You know, early on, Borges was telling us, and anybody that would listen, you know, it takes time for the quarterback in the system. I've seen it before, and obviously early on it looked, Denard looked shakier much more early on than later.
Mhm.
In what ways did you see him grow the most?
I think there was a confidence in the offense. I think there was a confidence in, you know, probably his teammates a little bit when you look at route running, protection, and all those things. But I think the biggest growth was him understanding progression reads, understanding, you know, how you move in a pocket without moving 100 miles an hour, you know, how you step up in there a little bit and gain a little more time and scan the field a little better. And then I think at the end of the year, because he was healthier, because we were able to some degree take a little relief off of him running the ball as much, he was much more physical and decisive in running the football. And that was huge for us.
How banged up was he?
Oh, he had a staph infection. He had a lot of different problems that went through during the course of the season. You know, his elbow, his hand. I mean, he had an abdominal problem. I mean, that he you know, he's a tough guy, and you know, he played with, and I just think he was so much healthier and more confident, probably at the same time.
Does that make it tougher when to not say much when you hear some of the criticism about how he's not doing this or that in the middle of the season?
Yeah, because there are no excuses. Everybody's beat up. You know, I mean, it's still there are no excuses for performance. You know, and performance by us doing a better job of coaching them and making sure they understand exactly the expectations. You know, and plays or routes or whatever from an offensive or defensive standpoint.
Coach, you've had some relative success now with players like Denard and David Molt, who aren't the traditional, prototypical players for the pro-style offense. Has that opened up your mind at all to maybe in the future recruiting players like that for your offense?
Well, I don't know what you mean with David.
David has described himself as smaller, but he's faster. And
Well, he's got great quickness, you know, and smaller, you know, I think that's all up to an opinion, you know. I mean, he's 290 pounds. I mean, that's not bad size. I mean, he's not like he's probably closer to 300. That's not like you're, you know, small, unless you consider me small. And I'm closer to 300.
But with like a dual threat quarterback like Denard, if there were another player like that.
Well, I think you always want to have enough athleticism in your quarterback. You know, believe me, we're a pro-style offense, but, you know, we don't want a guy who can't move in the pocket and can't do those things, you know, and I think that's what we've kind of recruited. And so I think the biggest thing has been everyone else's opinion of what Denard was, you know, and we never put any limitations on what he is.
Right.
I guess.
With what Borges inherited as far as personnel,
Mhm.
are you happy with the job that he did, considering what he likes to run versus what you guys ran?
I think, number one, I think the kids on that side of the ball did a tremendous job. I think the guys like David Molk, like Hughie, Junior, and you know, Fitz and Smitty and all those guys, and Denard, I think they did a tremendous job of adapting to some of the West Coast pro-style offensive things that Al added. And I got a whole staff, Daryl and Dan, and Heck and Freddie. I mean, I think they all did a tremendous job in teaching, and the same thing, fundamentals and the techniques and how they do individual and what their expectations are. So, and Al, he has a tremendous offensive mind, and he's been. You look at his resume and how many places he's been and he's coordinated, and he had Randall L. at Indiana. I mean, there's a lot of different guys. The guys at UCLA and Ryan Lindley, what he did with him at San Diego State. I mean, he's a smart man, and you got to look at your personnel first and foremost, and then adapt to it. It's not about it. And the best part is he doesn't have an ego. He doesn't, he doesn't care.
Project any kind of competitions right now in the bowl practices for starting jobs going into the bowl? I mean, obviously.
Yeah, I think you always do. I mean, and I would say, you look at it, and that's a really good question. Linebacker-wise, I think there's always some competition for us. I think up front, when you get, Will Campbell and Quentin Washington and, how they perform and what they do. Nate Brink is a guy who constantly is, pushing and doing a lot of good things in practice and needs to carry over a little bit more to game time. I think because of the depth at receiver to some degree, there's always good competition. Running back, Fitz did a nice job, but Shaw keeps fighting in there, which is a real credit to Michael, and Smitty will be healthier than he was at the end of the year. So to answer that, Angelique, they got to come out every day and earn it, and they have to earn it.
What is the start of ball practice almost like the start of fall camp a little bit, where you kind of got a deadline of when you're playing and things you have to accomplish?
Yeah, Jeff, we'll do a bunch fundamentally. A bunch of fundamentals this whole weekend, getting back into it a little bit. They've lifted and run, and then next week they'll lift and run again, and we'll come back and have more of a game plan, because the guys have been out. Greg, I think, was in one day, and I was in a couple days. So they've gotten a little bit of a head start. The GAs have done their due diligence of breaking down, the games we want broken down. So all that information is coming together. And so next week will be a little more, game planning. This weekend will be more of the fundamentals, techniques, playing fast, the physicalness, all those things.
How do you pick and choose what games you look at from Virginia Tech?
You usually always take the last four, and then you may go and look at, and I'm going to speak from both an offensive and defensive perspective, you're going to look at similar offenses or similar defenses and kind of see how they've wanted to approach and attack those schemes.
With Beamer, obviously not. You said you don't really have any relationship. You don't know him that well, but over the years, obviously you appreciated what he's done. What are the things that have stood out to you that he's done in building that program?
I think number one, Frank is known. Coach Beamer's known, the special teams and how they've performed over a course of many years. With blocked punts, blocked field goals, punt returns, the whole gamut within the kicking game, and that tells you that a team that is really coached well in the emphasis. I think their defense, Bud Foster does a tremendous job as a coordinator, how hard they'll play the game with, the soundness that they play with, and offensively they've always had a guy back there. I think they have a 1,600-yard rusher this year that's going to be able to run downhill and run physical, and that connects the offensive line with how they play. So, they're a football team and a program that does and should have a lot of confidence in who they are and a lot of pride in who they are. And when you you have that kind of team and that kind of tradition, because they've got, you know, they've built an awful nice thing in Blacksburg, and so those things are what I see and know without looking into the tape yet.
Do you pay attention to what happened there yesterday?
You know, I didn't know anything about it until 5 minutes ago, and, you know, it's a tragedy, obviously. I've kind of been out of the loop, to be honest with you.
New Big Ten coach at Illinois, Tim Beckman. Do you know him at all?
I know Tim. He's a good coach. Did a nice job at Toledo. And, you know, he was coordinator at Oklahoma State, and he was on the Ohio staff, you know, at one time. He's a good coach.
Last one.
Oh, have you talked to the seniors at all? Kevin talked Sunday night, I guess, when we were here, about having a very focused business approach to this bowl game because they were, his word, embarrassed last year. I mean, have you detected that, this sort of focus? And
Well, you've talked to him more than I have since
Okay.
then. I'm going to see him at 2:25 today. And we had one meeting the Monday after the last game, and they kind of got a sense of how we'll approach this.